They are.
Good afternoon, everyone, and obviously a joy to be here with you again, Kareem. It's a quarterly happening, I feel, being up here on this stage. And yeah, why did I create IONISIS? Maybe regretting it most of the days, but not now. I certainly didn't do it for the money or the glory, but possibly I did it to prevent another Morning Glory-like episode, but this time with jihadists trying to smuggle oil into the Med. So, joking aside, this was my attempt to give back to Libya by founding a charity which would promulgate accurate and up-to-the-moment information about the Islamic State in Libya. So on the one hand, the idea of creating the website and founding a nonprofit came out of my consulting business and my business background, which Kareem very kindly mentioned. And the reason for that is that my team, Rian and some others who I see in the room now, would become expert at producing Libya monitoring reports. And therefore, we were sitting on thousands of pages of reports about the security threats every week from the revolution until the present. And yet, on the other hand, IONISIS was a response, or as my team and I call it, EOIL, that's the acronym, to market demand. So to give you a little sense of all this, I'll tell you the backstory behind IONISIS. Since 2011, I've really been responding to the gap in the Libya field. In other words, people would contact me for information, and what they wanted to know changed over time. In 2011, I can recall distinctly, pretty much every question was an iteration of who are the rebels? Then in 2012, 2013, with the GNC election, everyone wanted to know about market entry or due diligence on specific Libyan businessmen. Then as 2013 and the political isolation law began to be a big issue, it was who are the militia leaders? How are they connected to each other? Then I can recall vividly the 2014-2015 period. Everyone wanted to know about the Tobruk-Tripoli split. Why was it deepening? Was Libya on a slow-motion train wreck, or was there a possibility to exit that bifurcation? And of course, what did that mean? It meant that market entry and due diligence requests were drying up. My consulting business was not as active in those years. And then something happened. I became associated with the shipping industry, particularly through Risk Intelligence that Ria and I work with, a Danish maritime intelligence firm. And we were cultivating accurate on-the-ground sources to deal with the threats that affect ports. But it turned out to understand what was happening at the interface between land and the sea, you needed to move on land to understand the jihadi actors who might, for example, threaten Ras Lanuf or Sidra. But when I was thinking about those shipping reports, I realized, yes, we had sources on the ground that no one else had, but the nature of the information was it was niche, and it was packaged in a way that it wouldn't be accessible to a broad audience, either government or media. So as that was evolving in my head, I remembered that the nature of questions I would be asked by media and government changed. People would ask silly things like, are there 1,000 or 2,000 jihadists in Derna? Or why is the Abu Salim Martyrs Brigade fighting ISIS? And my response would be, I'm not an expert on jihadi groups. I'm really interested in business and politics. But the questions kept rolling in. And then I remember one day in mid-2015, it was a journalist, maybe from The Guardian, maybe from the FT. So if you can't tell me, Jason, how many jihadists are in CERT, please direct me to the greatest expert on the Islamic State in Libya. And I racked my brain, and I realized we're in a small field. Kareem and I know the only 10 white people, as well as Arabs, who might be able to answer a question like that. And it dawned on me there was no expert on the Islamic State in Libya. There were experts on jihadist groups, and there were experts on Libyan Islamists, but really scant knowledge about ISIS, and it wasn't present all in one area. So surveying this gap, that's what made me want to create IONISIS, to provide a comprehensive and reliable source of easily searchable English language information to tell the story of the Islamic State and other jihadi actors, how they interacted, how they grew over time. And it's great to look over the audience and to see so many members of my team that have helped me. And what we try to do is to synthesize this information. And in a way, this report is the culmination of the IONISIS project, because What the report does is it derives from the existing literature on ISIS. It mines open sources, so tweets and Arabic social media and articles and peer-reviewed scholarship. But most crucially, it draws on human source interviews with Libyans who have been living this experience since the 2011 uprisings. So if you go on the Eye on ISIS website, you see that the posts are categorized into 4 categories: ISIS in action, other jihadi actors, Western response, and the anti-ISIS coalition. And going back to 2014, since before there was ISIS, we try to narrate what has happened each week in Libyan history in those 4 categories. It's true that the actual sources from which this information comes needs to be anonymous because our Libyan sources require their safety to operate. And to distill, these 20, 30,000 pages of information, these think tank reports draw analyzable lessons, like what should Western policy be as a result of the eviction of ISIS from Sirte? What does it mean that ISIS could first operate in a city that had been very anti-Gaddafi, like Derna, but then transition to a city that was Gaddafi's heartland, like Sirte? And we draw out these lessons in other publications, 2 that Ree has been very instrumental in at Hate Speech International, a Norwegian think tank. The one is called Who Pays for ISIS in Libya, where we deal with the financing aspect. For example, debunking the myth that ISIS used Libyan oil to fund itself. That's, of course, bogus. ISIS never used any oil revenue to finance itself. And then one that's come out recently, mapping Libya's jihadists. So to sum up, Kareem, you asked, why is the Eye on ISIS information unique? I would say that's because it derives from Libyan sources, not just open sources. But yet, Ree and I and Brett and Nate Mason, who we see here, have vetted this information. And then it's unique because it's dynamically searchable. And so, for example, you click on the interactive timelines to find out what was happening in June 2015. And then it has maps about how these jihadi groups have moved over Libya over time. And then I think the researcher or the government analyst can ask the data set questions. You can test the hypothesis against the data. And for me, this is an example of how scholarship should be going. Rather than a traditional book, which you read in a linear fashion, Eye on ISIS is more like what I would say a choose-your-own-adventure story, where depending on what suits you and what you're looking for, you read it in a different way. So I see this as kind of a model of how we could collate and organize complex information moving forward.
It also gives you the possibility to look at how these groups evolve and how these groups morph from